All right, so the reason why I wanted to present this class is I spent 26 years in the military, followed by 3 years working at the VA. When I got to a certain point in my military career, about 2007, 2008, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. You know, I had to get a real job. And I knew I wanted to still be in the x-ray field, but I didn't know what did that mean? What was my leadership style? Was that going to translate to the civilian sector, to you guys? You know, and I was really afraid of it. I didn't do like my wife. I didn't do PRN. I didn't go work at any of the hospitals. I was usually in that position where I was either the director of the department or the assistant director. In the military, we call it non-commissioned officer in charge or assistant non-commissioned officer in charge. So I knew that I had been part of pretty successful organizations, but I started doubting myself going, is it because I have the rank on and I'm doing this that people listen to me? Or was I doing the right stuff? So I bring up my wife because she worked outside the gate, as called it, off base, at the hospital right there when I was at Fort Hood, Texas, which is now called Fort Cavazos, Texas. Yeah. And she worked for a gentleman by the name of Randy Hill, who just happened to be.
Did you just say Fort Hood is not called Fort Hood anymore?
No, it's been changed to Fort Cavazos. Several of the bases have, as part of the renaming to take away from the Civil War stuff. Yeah, but I'll be honest with you, don't worry about it. It's still the hood. Depending on when your child was born, it's either the new hospital or the old hospital. It just goes from there. What year? No, I'm just trying to see if I was there too. So about the time I was there. So I'm 50. Anyways, so thank you. So my wife worked at a hospital outside the gates called Metroplex Hospital. There was a gentleman by the name of Randy Hill, who was a retired Army NCO himself, one of actually the senior ones in our career field. And I was taking his Sonia away from him because I was leaving Fort Hood, Texas to go to Fort Carson, Colorado to deploy with what was known the 10th CASH, 10th Combat Support Hospital. And I say his Sonia because she worked for him and he had been trying for years to get her to take leadership roles. And unlike myself, she's like, no, I'm happy to be a straight tech and just take care of patients. So every once in a while, I'd go pick her up for lunch or something like that, and he pulled me in the office, and it turned into a mentorship session, whether I wanted to or not. I didn't know this gentleman or anything, but he knew my wife, and that was good enough for him. And he kind of did that same thing. John, what are you going to do when you grow up and get out of the Army? You have to get a real job. And I told him, you know, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And he goes, have you ever worked in a civilian hospital? Have you ever interacted with people? I go, no. He goes, don't be afraid. It's the same thing, good and bad. He goes, but if you want to learn and make sure you have the right connections, there's an organization you could go join, and it's called an AHRA. So I went and joined the AHRA, and I just happened to meet this young lady right here, Terry, in the front row, and started going through the different things and learning about different stuff. Another thing he told me, he goes, you don't have to worry about pulling out Encyclopedia Britannica because we're in a modern age. He goes, get online. Start looking at that wishy-washy stuff, you know, because he knew who I was, a little bit military. He goes, it's okay to understand people's feelings and learn about stuff. He goes, what you probably don't realize is a terminology you need to call, it's called employee engagement. I was like, what's that? You know what I mean? Because military people just did their stuff. So I started learning what we would call soft skills. And I wanted to make sure that when I grew up, I can get into the right position. I wasn't coming in as that, I wasn't going to be ostracized because I deployed to Iraq or I was in Bosnia or all that stuff. Because a lot of times there's those biases. Well, either you have PTSD or, I mean, honestly, or you've done this, which is probably true in some context. So I just started doing it. And then through my journey with the AHRA and meeting the people with ICE, and I started talking about what I've done, and people start saying, well, that's awesome. Why aren't you talking to other people and saying it over and over? Because I'm that jughead that I need to hear something 5 or 6 different times before I say, oh, that's where I'm making my mistake. I went to a very good class a couple minutes ago, last session with Nicole Donraj. She was presenting, and some of the stuff she was talking about is exactly what I'm going to talk about, but from a different point of view. So that's why these soft skill classes have always been very important to me, because I used to always think, oh, that's wishy-washy stuff. I have the rank. I've been doing this since 1999, I'll say, instead of years, because that's public math, and I don't want to do that. But that's why I like to get up here and talk. One, because I want people to not suffer what I did by my own lack of self-awareness. And then I know that by me standing up here in front of you guys, it reinforces what I've learned and reminds me, and I'm going to learn also from this group at the same time. All right. Because I'm of a certain age, I do have to wear my glasses every once in a while, so you'll see me take it on and off. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is staff well-being is not an individual responsibility. If you're part of an organization and they succeed, it's part of the organizational mindset. It has to be successful through that way. Now, some of us may end up being the champions because all well intent kind of goes out the door when we get into our little pockets of silos and we get our little work areas. And I hate to call it this, but it kind of turns into this. We have our high school mentality, because that's where we learn our interaction, and we sometimes bring it to, but we have to remember, it takes everybody to work into it. How many people have you heard of the term HRO, high reliability organization? Okay, so it's not something new. And depending on who's producing, whether it's coming from that 3M TJC and they talk about it, or you're coming from others, they all have basically the same 3 tenets. The first one is always called either leadership engagement or leadership commitment. And the belief or the thought process that they talk about that is you cannot make a change unless you have leadership buy-in. Leadership has to demonstrate they do it. And I always like to bring up this example. As I mentioned, I was in the military. We used to use something called CHCS for our electronic health record. It is a MS-DOS program. They still use it. It's amazing though. I mean, I liked it because I could go do all kinds of ad hocs. But for the radiology, it was fine. But within the hospital system, we had 2 other EHRs. And of course, this is the oldest one, so it didn't really talk to that. So we would have to do a lot of little workarounds. For example, morning portables. The orders could be put in by the wards, but there was no prompt to us that there was a morning portable unless my morning tech knew all the patients that were on the ward and would go in. And what we used to do in the Army or in the military time was B and the last 4 letters of your social. That was your, so you would do that. And you would go in about 2 o'clock in the morning and look to see who has a morning portable. So depending on what size of hospital you are, that's a pain in the butt. Think about that. We fought and fought, and so that when they put the orders in, it will print up to our front desk behind here. So that saved my tech the responsibility of, not responsibility, the work of doing it. I bring this up because I want you to hear what a pain in the butt that is. So needless to say, everybody in the hospital is like, this system is terrible. It does not work. It's a pain. Well, if you guys have paid attention, we have what, 2 major EHR companies, one called Epic and the other one's called Cerner. Cerner won the Department of Defense and Department of VA contract. Right. So as my luck would have it, I'm at that hospital. That's the first Army Medical Center in the whole Department of Defense that's going to be the one to test it. So change management tells you what? You need to accept the change, embrace the change, get all this stuff so you get the people to buy in. Nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to take that leadership to do it. The first, what we call a hospital commander, which is basically an equivalent to executive director or CEO, depending on your location. He was great, but he was a doc and he wasn't really, he was like, okay, this is great. So we came live, I went live, and everything that could go wrong, you heard about it. And I remember sitting up in what we call the executive suite, because at the time I was aligned with the chief medical officer, chief nursing officer, as almost kind of like if you think of a department, you have the chair and your director. So it was the same equivalent, just the military does it by rank structure. And I sat in one of those meetings and he kept saying, this is going wrong, this is going wrong, this is going wrong. And I was just that guy in the back going, I have a question. Is there anything good going on with this right now? And they all like laughed and just kept going. And I said, no, really. We are complaining about this system, but what are we doing to go out and try to make it successful? And I got ignored, and I was okay with that because I had the concept of let's get this piece of equipment and break it at our hospital so it can be fixed for the other 300 and something hospitals that are through the Department of Defense. So 6 months later, we're still trudging along, using kind of both systems, using all that stuff. We get a new hospital commander who comes in, and small world it is. He was the first company commander I had back in 1994. He promoted me from little private Beall to now specialist Beall. And funny story even more is he's the one who did my retirement ceremony. So his joke at my retirement ceremony was, you know, I told John I was going to put him out of the Army because I did get kind of in trouble one time. I just didn't next year actually sit over his ceremony to put him out of the Army. But anyways, so when Tom came in, Tom had the attitude of, why are we shooting this down? It's not going to go back to the old systems. You guys, and I bring this up for this reason, you guys complained that the other systems didn't work, but now we have this new system and you're trying to make all the workflows exactly what you were complaining about because it's your comfort zone. And he goes, we as the leaders need to embrace the suck, is the way he called it. That was one of our military terms. And then build on to what are the good parts so we can start going. So for every time we give to hire a bad thing, we're going to give 2 to 3 good things, because it's just like if we were rolling out a new x-ray machine, everybody's going to want to know what's bad about it, not what's good about it. So you start doing it. And when he as a leader started doing it, I actually start seeing throughout the whole facility. And well, mind you, we had all gone through HRO training and we were HRO certified as an organization, but we weren't hunting the good stuff. So I'm sitting in the back of the room, like I said, as part of my position. I go, see, this is the leadership. It's not that what he did prior was bad. It just was a different way to go against stuff. All right, let's move on. So over the next 2 hours, oh, there we go, you're awake. Oh, you guys are safe. Over the next 45 minutes, this is what we're going to talk about, okay? I'm not going to break down. You know, when I was trying to come up with something to put up here to kind of talk about the next one, I couldn't find anything that actually did what I know when I was a director or when I was in leadership positions that actually showed us juggling. I was trying to find an octopus and all this stuff, and it just couldn't work. But really what this graphic is saying is, you know, whether you are in that team, top of the line director position, your first line squad leader in the Army, or a team leader, you're always juggling something. We are so busy. We can always get to it. You know, there's some days we walk in there and you're just like, we're the champions. I'm gonna accomplish this. The other days you feel like a dud. Some days you're gonna go in there and you're gonna change the world, and now on those same days your employees are looking like you have no clue what you're talking about. But we still, at the end of the day, have to do something. Ultimately, everybody in this room, whether you're touching a patient or you're like my sister who works in HR at City of Hope, or my cousin that's a nurse down in all these different places, we take care of our patients. That's ultimately what we do. So we always have to make sure that our team works together. Doesn't necessarily, I always used to joke, You don't necessarily have to like each other, but you have to respect each other so we can get the mission done of taking care of our patients. Okay. Now, I want everybody to remember, and I kind of brought this up a little bit earlier, soft skills are always changing. And I say it's always changing because as you look around just this room, if you look out the people who are attending this, we're all from different backgrounds. We're all from different age brackets. We're all from different parts of the nation. Okay. But when we're managers or raters or whatever term you want to put onto it, we're expected to know everything. At the bare minimum, just so we can make stuff run. I want you all to remember, though, unless you're a psychologist, that's not your job to understand everything why. You got to know just a little bit enough to make stuff move along, how to motivate your staff, let them know what's in it for them. Sometimes what I like to do is I like to tie in what's the organizational values and goals. And a lot of times I've talked to my staff and said, if that's not something you feel aligns with, whether it's your moral beliefs, your religious beliefs and stuff, maybe we're not the right organization for you. And I love you. And if you want to move on, I understand it. And I'll give you a recommendation so long as you're the right person to give a recommendation for, because I feel that you are an amazing tech, but maybe you're just not this organization. We're not right for each other. And then when you go across town, you and I are going to compete for the employees come out of school and all that stuff. So it'll be fun. You know, I try to make it fun like that. But I bring this up. You also have to remember about your own well-being. You can get burnt out very easy. I kind of have that little splash there and with the fireworks with the two soldiers, because whether I was in high school on a wrestling team, whether I was trying to be a firefighter after the riots in LA or join the military, I always believe that you never win by yourself. You know, you never win by yourself. Wrestling is an individual team sport, but even though I was at that little 90-pound wrestler in 19 whatever year that was, I couldn't win on the mat if it wasn't for the guy who was not that you're heavyweight, the guy who was a heavyweight beating me up and throwing me around, and I had to learn how to do this different stuff, all the training. Same thing goes for all the other organizations. We all play an interconnected seed. So I say that because when a leader has to take a knee and break away, you want to know that somebody can replace you, because sometimes we have to take a step out. So remember, when you're doing stuff, and I used to always have to remind myself, it's not all on you. Sometimes you have to take a break and put Robin, I'm sorry, Rachel, put Terry, Alpano, or somebody else to take the lead. You should not be afraid to go take a vacation because everything's going to fall apart while you're gone. I kind of have this in my back pocket to prove that point. It took me forever to disassociate. One, because when I was in the military, I thought I always had to be available. Then I'm working at the VA hospital, no direct reports, but I felt I had to have my phone on me in case somebody wanted me. So, you have to learn, one, to put it on silent and take it off vibrate, but walk away from that leash sometimes and allow the other people to take forward, because that will help you with your own well-being. Now, the importance of well-being and is kind of changes a little bit from the different environments. You all should know what your own well-being is as a person away from work. What makes you happy, what you go to, whatever hobbies you are. Mine, I'm goofy. I like to build Star Wars Legos. Lego, sorry, don't say plural. Somebody might attack you, say Legos. That's my thing. That's my get away from everybody. I look at a book. It tells me what to do. I don't have to think. And I just, some people like doing modeling. Some people like to garden and all these different things. Okay. But when it comes to work, it's the overall mental, physical, emotional, and economic health of your employees. And it's influenced by various factors. And you're going to look at that and you nod your head, and you probably in your head go, I already know who that applies to, or I know how that supervisor makes me feel right there. And I see the heads nodding out there as you're looking at this. So I want to bring that up. Now, one thing that we all have to remember, it varies by person to person. And why is that? Well, for some of the things I kind of already talked about a little bit about myself, you know, what is your background? What are your unknown biases that you have? I grew up in Southern California with a white last name, but I'm Hispanic. So I always had to fight for people to believe that I'm Hispanic until my dad showed up to a game and they looked at him like, oh, that's your dad? And all of a sudden I had friends. I was like, it's so that always bumps into my head about certain things when people make fun of my last name or spell my last name wrong. You know what I mean? And I bring that up because you're going, oh, that's kind of odd. But we all have those little niches. I also bring up, I grew up in Southern California, suburb of Los Angeles, and it's called West Covina off of I-10. So for those of you who are here in this area, it's used to be, the joke used to be by Jack Benny and Bob Hope that their speeding tickets from Hollywood to Palm Springs paid for the paving of the city street because it's a middle of nowhere at that time, you know? And so I have a certain lookout on things. I show up to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri in November of 1994, taking my first flight, sitting there. We had people that had never left their home in the Appalachian Mountains, had never gone anywhere other than Texas. Just everybody has different outlooks. And that's why I bring it up. It's different from place to place. So we forget that because with modern technology, we're kind of children of the world, or at least we're ignorant enough to think that we're children of the world, that we know what's going on and stuff. So just remember that. And of course, let's talk about the outside factors that contribute to employees. I probably don't have to do that because there's at least one or two of you right now in this room that are stressed out being here, being away from home. Maybe a daughter that's not doing so well, or you're raising a niece because whatever reasons you're raising her, and so you're stressing out, so you can't necessarily be here. And I'm glad nobody shook their heads at that because that's for you. Now, the importance of being a well-being, talk about burnout. What it is when it comes to, we all have, and let me start to rephrase. We all have different levels of burnout. It just, whatever it is, you should all know what yours is. That's in life, whatever. At work, it's considered a little bit different because it's occupational related. I know when I was burnt out at work, mine was not so much the job. My burnout came from my last leader before I left the VA. And that's part of the reason why I joined the organization I'm part of now. I had worked in a job that's called strategic planner. So I was not in radiology anymore. It was my first job out of the Army, and I'm got my grown-up clothes, not wearing a uniform. And I was responsible for the western half of the state of Washington. We had two healthcare system, what's the word I'm looking for? Campuses, I'm sorry. And then we had 10 outlying clinics. Now, these outlying clinics were not DOD or government buildings. They were actually leased. And the reason they were leased is our patients, while they are ex-military, do not necessarily go home all the time when you look at the big picture. So the VA, the way it's set up, it has its anchor hospitals. One's in Seattle, one's in Tacoma, which is outside of what's known as Fort Lewis or Joint Base Lewis McChord now. So those are two ones. And then the rest of the state along the I-5 corridor and kind of different things, different sides, has clinics. And some of these clinics are just straight outpatient clinics. Some of them we have imaging, some of them we have lab. My responsibility was to take a look at the all the data analysis of who's retiring, what generations they're either doing, and decide where in 5 years, based off all that, is my data or my patient's going to be at. Because the ideal is we shouldn't make a veteran drive 2-3 hours to go get care, you know? So it came to things like, okay, is this location on a major bus line? Because not everybody has a car. Does this have access, if they go from here, where are they in proximity to major retail areas and food places? Because then maybe the folks that come to visit us, they can do everything with one visit. And it sounds funny. And I bring that up because that's a lot of, huh? No, it is. It's good. And I agree with you. But it was funny when I was in Department of Defense, we didn't care. You don't live on base, you just drive to base. We might have a couple little clinics outside within a couple of miles. And so it was a weird thing for me to learn. And I bring that up because it was really hard to understand. It's like learning what an IDN and a GPO is, and which hospital owns which hospital and who's selling to who. And you're hoping that somebody says something on LinkedIn so you can learn something new, you know. And I have to say, I'm gonna toot my own horn. I got good at it. And I was really good at it. My director gave me a bonus. You know, this isn't Department of Defense or Department of VA. They come, but they don't come like this. The one I got, so I was really happy. And then he turned around and got promoted. So within our hospital system, we had, you know, the 2 hospitals, like I said, one that was at the Seattle, he was the head guy for the whole region. The guy that was at the other location was the executive VP. Well, he got promoted, took the VP position, brought in this amazing woman who had worked with the Veterans Benefits Association, the VBA. I was so excited because I was happy she's coming in. She didn't really know about hospital, but she knew about organizations, and she was great. Well, all of a sudden, I was no longer the golden child, and which was fine. You know, you gotta. And so my well-being started going down because I started, and I bring this term up because Nicole talked about in the last class, there was these microaggressions that she was saying to me. And it was really demoralizing for me after a while. I was not happy. And I'm that goofy guy that just for no reason walks down a hallway whistling, forgetting where he is, because that's just who I am. And people started noticing that I was not happy. And I won't go into the different things that she would say or not do, but I felt that I was burnt out. It was right or wrong. I'm the type of guy that when I would come home, I'd bring 1 or 2 things with me. Usually it was just something to read because, you know, in my office at work, you don't have the time to read because people are coming in and out. So I would do that and read. My wife is like, you are so anxious. And I couldn't figure out why I was so anxious. Well, I didn't have my stuff to review when I came home. And that was part of my mental decompression from work. So I went ahead, and when somebody reached out to me and said, hey, are you looking for a job back in radiology? Even though it was they who will not be named vendor, I went ahead and went to the dark side. Plus, I also trusted this new boss, just the different things that's going on. All right. So some more things. I'm sorry, I went a little bit on a soapbox on that again, but so some of the things I think about when it comes to burnout. The first one talks about unmanageable workload. I know it's hard to, in this day and age where we don't have enough people to hire, but our patient load is still going up. We need to try to do as best as we can to make sure that John, who's always the workhorse, is still being a workhorse and the other people aren't doing it. So we don't lose that person who is the workhorse. Perceived lack of fairness. Sometimes we need to take that analogy and looking at ourselves. Am I always leaning on Alpana, or am I always leaning on Daniel because the rest of you just don't want to work? And because you have that trust with them and you see them all the time, when something cool comes up, like I'm going to send them to the ICE conference, somebody to the ICE conference, they're the first two because they always work for me. Well, you always go to them. That's why they're the ones work for you, you know. And so it can be a bad downward spiral. Lack of job control. You know, if you're an engineer, if you're an X-ray tech, you kind of CT tech, all the imaging stuff, you kind of know what your job is going to be like from now till next month because it's patient driven. You kind of have a patient load. So you can't necessarily control that. But as a leader, if, for example, I need to get a new portable X-ray, you know, there's something, has anybody heard of something called an Eisenhower matrix? Okay, so how about a safer matrix from the TJC where in the upper right hand corner it's the most drastic. So think about this. So Eisenhower matrix is based off, named off President Eisenhower, and it's a 4-quadrant, well, I'm sorry, that's kind of goofy saying 4-quadrant, but it's a quadrant matrix. In the upper right hand corner, this is absolutely must be done, and it must be done by me. Then it kind of goes to the left. It goes, it has to be done. It doesn't have to be this minute, but still needs to be done by me, so to speak. And then the bottom two are, I don't have to do it, but it has to be done. And then this one right here is kind of like, it needs to be done as soon as possible, but it can wait. So what I've always tried to do is like, do I really? Yes, it'd be cool to go to that vendor and kind of get wine and dine. We used to be allowed to wine and dine us and go to all these different stuff. But at the end of the day, am I the tech that's going to be using this piece of equipment? So what I started doing was I started developing the lead techs or the and 1 or 2 techs, and I say, hey, we need to get a new portable. Here's the vendors that we as the military are allowed to talk to. You call them, set up times for them to come in and speak, and then I want you to do a decision matrix that's weighing everything so that it's not purchasing stuff just by, and what they're doing is they're coming and have the report to me every so often. And most of those folks are like, this is probably the greatest thing I ever did. I actually had a voice in what we're doing. At the end of the day, it wasn't even me as the director that had to find choices, you know, as the CEO, but all the work that they did. And then, you know, said, well, you know what, we want this because the gantry's this big, you know, whatever piece of equipment, or this has AI, and this is what we said in the beginning of 5 things we thought was the most important. So we put 5s at that if it meant this. And so you kind of have the score of what it was. And I'm sorry, I'm probably going to do another session on this, that. But those folks started feeling like had of, you know, what was going on. A lot of times what I would also do is, you know, everybody celebrates Tech Week a little bit differently. But what we used to do is we would have a committee at the beginning of the year set up. And my rule was always, could only do it for 2 years in a row. It has to be shared amongst others. But what I did do was I allowed the techs to vote one person in if they wanted to be part of it, so that that person that's maybe the best planner could always get the opportunity to do it. But all the other staff were the ones who would vote that person in. It wasn't John kind of coming up with it. So, you know, I always had my special sandwich or something, that whatever they were doing, you know, based off what Rankin liked. Low recognition or organizational support. You know, it's hard to recognize people all the time because then it starts sounding just like lip service. What 2 of my last organizations, the VA did, you know, with Teams, you know, Teams and Google or whatever you guys use has really changed communication around the way we interact. I used to joke, why do I go into work to sit in an office to talk to the person in the next office on Teams when I could do this from home? You know, but anyways, so what a lot of the organizations have started doing is doing public recognition over Teams, almost like we talked about this in the last classroom, like last session. I kind of laughed about it. It was like a gratitude page, and you do the recognition there. It's not that often, but you know, the vendor I work for, when somebody does something really good, the CEO actually gets involved and says, hey, Joe Blow, who's the person in charge of, I'll say Henry Mayo's, because that's where you used to work at, said that they could not have done this without you. And I want to say thank you. And then, they'll do another thing later on. But what happens when we're not doing well-being, we're not working each other, we start forgetting about this stuff. And then what do we start thinking? They don't care what I do. They don't appreciate anything I do. And that starts making you doubt, like you don't feel like you're part of the organization. Interpersonal conflict, I don't know that I necessarily need to talk about that too much as I'm looking around the room and everybody's like, yeah, we all have it. I mean, I used to joke when I was teaching basic leadership in the military is that there was always going to be some form of conflict. Going back to, like I said, hey, I grew up in Los Angeles. So I was a Raiders fan. And I would say Raiders, I'd be like, oh, we can't even agree on a college team that's the best team, even though they have a championship, stuff like that. We're always going to have some sort of conflict. So, and I bring that up because conflict's a little bit healthy. It's just when does it get to the point where it feels like you are not valued by the organization or you are not listened to? When does it split up the department? And of course, values mismatch. I talked about that a little bit earlier about the situation. I kind of threw that in a little bit earlier than now, but sometimes, right or wrong, we don't all have seen eye to eye. It might be a great organization, but maybe that leadership at that time is not fostering that culture that makes you healthy personally. So maybe you have to go to the next one and do it. And, that's kind of why I stepped away from my last organization. Now, engagement. And a lot of people hate the term employee engagement because they're like, oh, that's the latest catchphrase, like, performance improvement, lean Six Sigma, lean Six Sigma, change management, HRO, but really when it comes down to it, excuse me, we have to engage with each other because we're human beings. We talk to our patients one way or the other. When engagement's not, and when I say engagement, when I say honest, endearing engagement is not felt, if you're in a leadership position and someone's talking to you and you feel like they're just kind of blowing you off, you're like, all right, I'm gonna go to John and I'm gonna give him the next time. And that's the same thing when our supervisors are talking to us or our colleagues that run lab is blowing us off or something like that. We start realizing, okay, that's one time. Let's see what happens. So we have to have genuine engagement. Now, talking about well-being, and it has a lot to do with engagement and stuff, some of the physical attributes that actually they have found that hurts people. And I'm actually going to be doing another session this week with my friend Trisha Jamel about incivility in the workplace. They have found in certain studies that the way people interact amongst each other, others who are the victims of it, a lot of them internalize it, and it leads to stuff such as heart disease, headaches, the stress from it. I never really suffered much from headaches at all, despite being blown around in certain things and getting in here and there. I never really had headaches until I was this last example. I was talking about the new supervisor. I just was stressed out. I couldn't understand it. I was always like with my hands in my fist, and I just didn't like it. My neck started tensing up, and it was crazy. And I took pride in the fact that I can get along with anybody. I just couldn't, and I was like, this is weird. Psychological, depression, insomnia, psychological diseases are some of the other things. Now, I have these two up right here by themselves, and I bring this third one to kind of capture. So what's the so what of this? People are people. Who cares about that? Well, when your staff starts going through that, or you start going through that, it starts leading to stuff like absenteeism. job dissatisfaction, presenteeism, and engagement. By that, that means I may show up, but am I really engaged? Yes, ma'am.
It also really has a lot to do with your patient satisfaction.
It sure does. Yep. Yep. Ooh, I'm a little behind. Let me get moving. So why does this matter? So Gallup started doing their employee engagement reports back in 2021. And back then they found that employee engagement actually cost the businesses in the United States between 450 and over $550 billion a year. What they found was that 26% surveyed said that they were actively engaged. They loved being where they were, with 18% I'm looking for the next job. I'm only here because I can't live without having a paycheck until I find the next one. I have always thought, to me, that 66% was extremely high. So I was like, wait a minute. So all it takes is one incident for them to turn to the dark side, or one incident to bring them to the light side. When I started learning this, I was like, wow. So let's put this in a different context. Think about it as rowing as a boat. This is what it would look like. You got all those people in the front doing all the work, and that's from 2020. And I put that here because, believe it or not, when I talked about in the last slide, the first time it was at 26%. In 2020, as everything was going on with the COVID-19, we had one of the highest levels of engaged performers at 36%. So if we were to do last year's, what do you think the numbers for engaged would be? How many of you think it'll be higher than 36%? So by the fact that nobody raised their hand, how many think it'll be lower than 36%? Okay, I know I kind of prepped that. So it's actually at 33%. But what was strange, if you look at this back here, it was 13% actively engaged, or as like they like to call the saboteurs. The number did not change in the middle. It went from 33 to 16. I'm not saying, it doesn't say that everybody went from the 33% engaged to 16. You know, some people who were actively, that were not engaged, have moved over to them. I like to use the rowing mechanism because it gives that visual for everybody to see how much work everybody's having to do. And, you know, Gallup actually does it too, and I just kind of made it my own. And I like this term, same boat, different engagement. Some drive, some ride along, some jump off, and some fall off. But because not everybody likes the boats analogy, so I thought I'd just throw this picture up here so you could kind of see the correlation. Now, when you actually go and take a look at actual Gallup reports, there's another portion in here that I really didn't want to talk about today, because I was always don't talk about religion and politics in public. But politics have actually played a big part also in people's dissatisfaction, because people are talking about politics in the workplace and talking about the stuff that's going on in the news. And so that's actually added a lot to it. I mean, I can see just by some of your faces like, yeah, that's inappropriate, or yeah, I have that too. So that's why some people will also leave those environments to get away from that. Now, does anybody not work in a hospital? Okay, all right. So if you go into a hospital, we're always very proud of our last TJC or our last, I don't know, radiologist, whatever certification I got, because we're, our Press Ganey. We always put all that stuff up. I put this sign here because what if we actually turn around and did like a work site did, and we talked about the last time we had an injury? This is kind of a joke, but last year, 2 years ago in 2022, I did not realize I was still thinking it's 2023. In 2022, 245 patients suffered preventable harm in this hospital. Our goal this year is to only have 2025. You all laugh. I mean, it's an improvement. Well-being is kind of like that same thing. I bring that up because we talk about all the good stuff, but we don't necessarily think about everything we've got going on. One of the quotes that have always kind of resonated with me in my different times, and as I've grown older, I don't want to say I've necessarily matured, but as I've grown older, this has had a different meaning to me at different times. You know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Now, you could say that's a little bit wishy-washy because you're not paid to care, you're paid to get stuff done. But who wants to be part of an organization when you don't feel valued? You know, I was a very young NCO. I was proud. I was in the Army 4 years, got promoted to sergeant. And if you guys don't know what that means now, me and him are buddies, drinking all the time and all that stuff. But now I'm in charge. I have to do his evals and all this good stuff. And I'm the one who recommends to the company commander or first sergeant should he receive something called a Uniform Code of Military Justice thing because he was late for work 3 times or something like that. And at that time, I thought I knew everything. It doesn't matter. You know, I had one of my senior NCOs pull me aside. Goes, you know what? You know what you're doing, but you don't show empathy. You're in there like this doing the chop, and that's not necessarily the way you do everything. And so, for back then, that's what the way I learned about this. Now I look at it and I go to myself, I'm not, like I said, not necessarily a vendor, but I deal with vendor relations. And if I'm going to go see this young lady that I met years ago, I can't go in there and just there and try to do the sell. I have to be nice. I'm not saying whining and dining to get stuff, but I have to do the relationships because I'm coming from the outside. Whereas if she and Alpana were leaders working together, they're a team, but if they don't like each other, how are their people who work under them going to work together? Because they're going to see that these two don't get along, and it starts creating polarization. Okay. This is hot off the press. When I was going through my sessions and I was doing the final stuff, all of a sudden I saw this thing called the ICE magazine got published. Graphic. I didn't know there was such a thing. Insert laugh. But there was an article put in there called Rad Ideas by Trisha Chamel. I didn't know she was doing this. And it started talking about some of the strategies that you can use to make work more relatable for you and your staff. And I looked at this and said, this is something we can also do. Okay. So one thing, I kind of forgot about something like this. Keep your door open as much as possible. It's not always available. It's not always, you're not always available. But this way, when your staff sees your door closed, they know you're working and doing something. I used to leave my office. I hated being in my office because I thought I should be shooting x-rays. And everybody said, no, John, we prefer you to be a leader instead of touching patients. So I would do the gimbal walks. You know, I would go, you know, no matter where I was, people always knew that on Mondays around this time, I'd be walking around this part of the facility. So if they wanted to tell me something or they need to get my ear and let me know something good was going on too, we would do that. So whatever works for your relationship or your style. Know your team members, let them get to know you too. This is not saying they need to know everything about you. But my team members always knew that I was married to the love of my life, and I met her in, believe it or not, St. Louis Airport in 1994, November 14th, 1994. And don't think, oh, he remembers the date because he loves her. I remember the date because that's the date we joined the Army. You know, we were going to basic training, and I'm seeing her going, oh, I even told her, I'll see you in San Antonio. Because at that time, we weren't necessarily doing male-female basic trainings. We were one of the first classes to do. So everybody knows that story. They think it's hilarious. And they all, you know, I always joke, my wife's the smarter one because she didn't stay 26 years. She did that initial term, got her degree, got her certification, and then I questioned her following me for the next 26 years. But, you know, that's the story everybody knows. But nobody knows that, hey, I'm from Los Angeles, but who my father is, that he was a sheet metal worker for 40 something years, that he did all this stuff. You know, so there's different levels that you have to do. I forgot about this one, and as you can tell, I work remotely now, but this is kind of my favorite one. Obtain a set of door handle tags or something to do. What I did was, you know, you go down the halls in the doctor's office and it says with patient, whatever. I used to have that say, hey, I'm in a meeting, don't bother me right now, or something what people knew. And I always had, because that's the type of person that I am, and that's why I have an stencil, was when I was in the military, I had one that said goofing off. So I had the door because I didn't want you to see me goofing off, but if you need to talk to me, go ahead and knock on the door. All right. Some other type of strategies, increase the stability of your staff's work schedule. I know it's easier said than done because a lot of us operate a 24-hour facility. So you can't always do that, but try to have it as close as you can. Provide opportunities to identify and solve workplace problems. I kind of talked about with the portable earlier. It allows me, as I was a young leader, to feel like I had a say, I had a buy-in, even though really at the end of the day, my boss had it, but I felt like I contributed to the team. And when you do that, you feel like you're valued. And at the end of the day, I've talked about it a lot. Feeling valued goes a long way. Staffing is always a big thing. Encourage your managers to support employees' personal needs as much as possible. I say that without making sure that you do not look like you're favoring them. I had, when I was in Germany, we were pre 9/11. We ran a X-ray department and CT department with 2 people on the weekend. They would come in on Friday. They would just cover everything, and if they needed stuff, they would call one of us in. So the X-ray techs would do, they're my soldiers, they would do the head CTs and anything without contrast. If it came to contrast, we had to call the actual CT tech, registered CT techs, and that was pre-September 11 in a military facility, so we could get away with it. Well, we started going to college, and they started asking, can we adjust schedules for this, for that? And I was like, well, first of all, I'm not going to figure out the schedule. You tell me how the schedule is going to work. And I'll go, and I want 3 different formats. And then you weigh to me why. 1, I wanted them just to work for it. 2, I wanted them to feel like they were a part of it. So we adjusted the schedule on the weekends so that they can now, one would be the backup tech for the other one. And they just would go to school on Saturday and like that. Like I said, we weren't really that busy. September 11th, of course, changed everything. Take steps to foster a sense of social belongings among employees. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Be present, eyes on them. When I was a first sergeant in the Army, that was probably one of the hardest things for me because I was in charge of a company of about 500 soldiers at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, and half of those were doctors. So chasing after your own doctors to get them to do stuff, it's probably fun. Now imagine chasing after doctors who have to do certain physical fitness things, certain things to deploy for war, all the good stuff. I was a busy person. So I was always on it. And one day, I was running I was running pharmacy lab and x-ray, and he was running supply chain and a couple other things. But when I took this position as first sergeant, I now, by leadership position, was higher 1. And he walked up to me and goes, hey man, you need to stop doing that. I was like, what? He goes, get off the computer. You're talking to me, but you're on the computer and I'm just here. And I was like, damn, you're right. You know what I mean? I was so caught up in the fact of my job and trying to get home, I forgot about that. So make sure you're present. When used to do the newcomers briefs at the 2 hospitals that I was at and was in that position where I got to come and talk, I used to talk about the tile rule. And everybody's like, what do you mean tile rules? Well, you walk down a hallway, you have tiles on the floor, you have tiles on the thing. I go, stop counting tiles. Okay? Stop counting tiles. Look forward. You don't know if this gentleman that's walking up to you, you don't know why he's there. He may not be having a bad day, but his father may be having a bad day. And just, sir, you don't have to do anything. Sometimes just that smile will do it. I used to do this thing where I say, all right, close your eyes, stay awake, close your eyes. And I would say, imagine the last time you were in a hospital and you were there for something. What do you remember that made you feel good about that? Besides the fact of walking out the door and you got a clean bill of health, hopefully. And half the time was like, you know what? It was that person who just, whether he intended or not, just said, how you doing? Good day. Or Hey, do you know where you're going? You know, stuff like that makes all the world. And when our patients come to the front desk, I always would get upset with my junior leaders and talking to them and say, don't forget our front desk. They're probably one of the most important people in our organization when it comes to taking care of our patients, because they're the first ones they see. 9 times out of 10, they might even be the ones that talk to them on the phone. Not most of us don't necessarily own our scheduling anymore. So sometimes they're coming into our department for the first time in face to look at it, and they already got the bad feeling off of the centralized scheduling. These folks at our front desk smile, they do it. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. Let's see how I can help you. Make sure whoever's in charge of them is available to talk to the patients, because when that patient comes to you and to do CT and they're already upset by everything's going on, it's kind of contagious. Then it becomes a aggressive patient. Let's just get them out of here as soon as possible. That's why I always talk about eyes. Don't be afraid to lead by example. I think I've talked about that a lot already with HRO. It's leadership commitment. Now, check in with yourself daily. Make sure we got, we got like 2 minutes, don't we? I apologize. So make sure you check in yourselves daily. See that you're taking your quality breaks. I sometimes would just close my office. Like I said, I put the thing up and saying in a meeting, really what it was like a 10-minute meeting. I just turned off the computer, put the phone off, and I would sit there and just tell myself, oh, it's gonna be better, it's gonna be better. Whatever it is that you need to do just to close your eyes for a few minutes so you can power up. What about remote employees? This is kind of rough. I didn't realize some of these statistics that came out from Forbes. 12.7% of full-time employees work from home. Being in the medical field, you don't necessarily see that unless they're like in contracting or HR, or like I was doing strategic planning, or like I am now working for the dark side. Then it says 28.2% are a hybrid version. There's some of the estimations that 32.6 million Americans will work remote by 2025. And then of course, you know, everybody wants to work from home one capacity or another. I used to joke with my boss. As I said, I'm a patient at the VA. I would be at work doing a virtual appointment with my doctor at the VA, looking at my window, seeing the clinic that if I went in person was right there, and he was working from home. And I was like, wait a minute. Oh, we won't get into that. All right. The highest percentage of remote workers are in the 24 to 35% age bracket. Remote workers on average earn 19,000 more than office workers, in-office workers, and the average of 19,000, those in the office of 74,000. Why do I bring this up? Because it's kind of funny. 69% of remote workers report increased burnout from digital communication tools. You know, I actually have my work laptop right here because I had, just in case this didn't work, I could put it in here. Yeah, you know, we all do. This is not a work phone, but it was a work phone. You know, it's kind of a sensory overload. Sometimes I would be scheduled when I was at the VA for 3 meetings at the same time. Or if it's not at the same time, it ends at 10 o'clock and the next meeting starts at 10 o'clock. When am I supposed to go to the bathroom? It was just back to back, back to back. We used to do morning huddles as a hospital together. We now do, most of us do it online, virtually. Okay. I think the irony of it is 53% of the remote workers say it's harder to feel connected to their coworkers. Oh, the irony. And why am I bringing this up when it talks about burnout? Is the Wall Street Journal published in January that remote workers were 35% more likely to be laid off in 2023 than anywhere else, than other employees. And the reason being is I work at these two and I know everything about them. You and I see each other once a week. You both are productive. I tend to like them more. And that's what really what it came down to. That's what the supervisor said. They had that rapport, that thing together. So what I would suggest, and another one, remote workers were 32% more likely to quit because they didn't feel that they were part of the organization. So what I've seen, I know my organization has done, I talked about the cheer boards and stuff like that. What we've done before is, so my CEO, my previous organization, he would do on Fridays when we had this stuff, that'd be kind of like the fun day. So everybody had to be on screen unless you were driving or something like that, and you shouldn't be on it, but they would still do. And you could do a fun background instead of that official back. Whatever, it'd go tie. If it's Super Bowl, you'd put, now I would always put the Raiders, even though they don't make it anymore. But it'd always be that. So we all learned a little bit about each other. It'd be fun. So like I said, a little bit of tension is okay. It's fun. Some of the strategies, I already talked about that. But one of the big things is this bottom one right here, managing expectations and boundaries. Both last two, my organizations are national organizations. I worked in Washington State. The headquarters for VA is Washington, D.C. The headquarters for my organization I work for now is in Houston. Always ahead of time for me. So they would do stuff try to do stuff at 6 a.m. in the morning. That's 9 a.m. for them. So I was like, hey, I don't mind doing it. But just remember, this is my time. So I just, I kind of got a little snide was I said, okay, so I can reach out to you at 8 p.m. your time. And that kind of went on. I felt like, well, I always have my BlackBerry or whatever it was at the time. Just aged myself by saying BlackBerry. But, it kind of goes like that. So make sure that helps because it sets boundaries. Now, I bring this up here and say, don't forget, because I did when I was putting this together. And once again, I'm reading through the magazine and the main title, the cover thing called Burnout, the deteriorating state of mental health in the workplace. Our bosses, our radiologists, or whoever's, don't forget about them. We always, now, I don't really stress too much about them because I think they get paid enough to compensate, but that's my bias. As I said, we all have different biases. But remember, check in on them. Make sure they're doing okay too. Because if you don't have the radiologist, you could have all the techs in the world and then it costs you money to send it out to somebody else to read, but reach in on them. It's a really good article to read. I was really impressed with it. So I suggest you take a look at reading it. I know this is really quick and going through. That's my whatchamacallit. If you guys want to connect with me on LinkedIn, by all means, I'd be more than happy to connect with you and we could talk more or whatever. Let's see, did they put the actual, oh, here it is. Let me bring this screen down so you guys can do it. Please remember that by scanning this does not give you credit for the session. Make sure you scan yourself on the way out if you haven't. Tell them what bad jokes I did or if you appreciate it or whatever. I always appreciate feedback because I want to be better at what I do. So thank you for what you guys do yourselves. Thank you for coming, and I'll see you over at the keynote that's across the way over there. Have a good day. Thank you.